What's up? This is Ray. Welcome back. Hey, we got a very cool episode for you today, especially if you're into analog film photography. We're going to be looking at Lomography's, one of their latest black and white film. This is called their Potsdam Kino film. And what's unique about it is it's really cut from a cinema film. It used to be used in German movies back in the day. And what we're going to find out is that this film has a unique tonal curve to it as far as the contrast and stuff. It looks different than your typical Tri-X or Ilford, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. But want to thank Lomography, specifically Bridget from Lomography USA. She's really cool, and sometimes she's able to send me things like this to test. So yeah, if you're curious about this film, please stick around, especially to the end. Watch the whole thing. You may find that this film is really perfect for certain situations, especially if you don't like to do a lot of editing. So yeah, we're gonna be checking out Lomography Potsdam Kino in medium format right now. Stay tuned. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is this film is in kind of high demand. So Bridget was only able to send me one roll. Because of that, I chose to use my Mamiya M645 instead of the Rolleicord, which shoots 12 frames. This is able to shoot 15 frames. And even though I had a limited amount of images, I wanted to experiment. I wanted to be kind of daring. So the first two shots I'm going to show you is I did a kind of studio shot with this one single softbox. I did two shots, one of me and one of my daughter. So if you look at the one of me, I like it in that it has an unmistakable, unique analog film look, especially if you look on the wall behind me, the way the shades, the gradation of the shade, you can see the grain in it. And it just has a unique look. The mistake I made when I was shooting my daughter is I probably exposed too much for the lighter part of her, so the image came out underexposed. You can see how on one side of her face it's very dark, pretty much all black. But you can still see the character of the film in this particular image. So those are two of the first experiments I did with this film. Hey, check this out. I want to show you why I love this film so much. Look at this image of my daughter. When I scanned it and looked at it, I was kind of stunned because normally with other films, I have, like Tri-X, I have to raise the highlights, lower the darks to give it more contrast. The way this one came out of the scanner, it needed very little editing to get it how I wanted. And when I magnify the image, it is so crisp. The grain is so fine, in other words, in this particular case, it could really pass for a digital photo. And that can be good and that can be bad, because as much as I love this photo, it doesn't look like film in this particular case. So that's one thing to keep in mind in this type of situation. Another thing to look at is her face, her cheek. You see how the sun, it's almost blown out. And also on the dark side of her sweater, it's very dark. So it's important to keep in mind this is a high contrast film. So when you're shooting, you really need to meter with that in mind. So if you need highlights preserved, you have to keep that in mind, as well as the darks. But it does have this natural, contrasty, unique look to it that you don't see, that I haven't seen in other films yet. All right, so we're at this nature park. It's really hot out here, as you can see. I'm sweating, but the point is I want to see how this 100 ISO daylight film handles in this harsh environment. And I especially want to see how it handles the gradation of tones in the clouds. For example, the bright white areas to the darker areas. I just love clouds on black and white. So we'll take a few shots in this nature preserve and see how this film does. All right, so technically, I developed my own film, so I was able to find developing recipe for this on Massive Dev Chart. What I found was I used Rodinol, 1/50th dilution, 9.5 minutes at 20 Celsius. So yeah, that's how I developed this, exactly how and when I pulled it out of the water, after rinsing it, it just looked beautiful. It looks like really the exposures were pretty great, which was cool. But looking at the negative, I'm going to show you next, you'll really see a difference with this film when we look at the negative and compare it to a more typical type of film. Let's do that right now. All right, I think the best way for me to show you the characteristic of this film is to show you, this is Kodak Tri-X. This is not the Potsdam. Notice how the Tri-X is very neutral. The highlights have detail, the shadows, everything is neutral. This is a perfect kind of negative to edit. Now here is the Potsdam Kino. What do you notice about it? You notice how the highlights are darker. The darker areas are much stronger. It has much more contrast than your typical Tri-X. And this negative is going to show you that much better than some edited photo that I did. So because of this characteristic of the cinema film, that's something you want to keep in mind, of course, when you're metering and especially when you're doing your pre-scan. But that is how it gets that unique look. One important thing about this film that I really like about the actual emulsion, or should I say the actual film base, is that it dries almost flat. So when you put it in your scanning tray, it doesn't have that bow to it, which would cause problems with your scanner's focus. So as long as the bow is on top, you put it in there, just the weight of the film will bring it down and make it practically flat. And that's very important, because there's other films I've tried that wouldn't lay flat, and I just will never use them again. So this is important if you're someone who's scanning yourself. It'll make it a lot quicker, not having to fight with the film and getting fingerprints on it and things like that. All right, so full disclosure, I know I only had 15 shots, but I did 2 experiments here that I'm gonna show you that really were kind of failures, right? Look at this waterfall. You notice how it's really kind of dark in the shadows, underexposed dark? That is one of the qualities of this film that you really have to take into consideration. What I should have done was really meter for the darkest part of the shadows, which I didn't do. And to make it worse, I shot this as a 2-second long exposure. And there's something called reciprocity failure that I'm not really hip to. Anything longer than 1 second, you have to add more time. You have to figure out this complicated mathematical equation, how much more time to add. Maybe that should have been 4 seconds, but as you can see, this image came out too dark because of that. All right, so that is my review of Lomography Potsdam Kino film in medium format. As you can see, it's a unique film. It has a unique look to it. And that's what you need when you're shooting film. You need film stocks with different characteristics that will match what you need at the time. You don't want everything to look the same, right? So yeah, that's the point of this. I'm gonna put a link to the Amazon store, Lomography's Amazon, where you can get this. Sometimes the price fluctuates and sometimes it may not be in stock, but check there first. Hey, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them below in case I left anything out. And keep in mind, as I always say, no matter what film you use for your art, your photography, or your wall mounts, until next time, as always, keep it real.